Welcome to Security Boulevard, the cybersecurity podcast from the Futurum Group. Each episode explores a variety of topics within cybersecurity and the technologies that drive it. You can find us at securityboulevard.com, the Security Boulevard YouTube channel, TechStrong TV, and all of your favorite podcast platforms. Before we jump into today's episode, I'd like to introduce my guests before we begin, starting with Jack.
Hi, I'm Jack Poller, Principal Analyst with Paradigm Technica today.
And Fernando, Montenegro, I lead cybersecurity research at Futurum.
And of course, I'm Tom Hollingsworth. I am an event lead for all things security at Tech Field Day, which is a part of the Futurum Group. Let's jump into today's episode. No doubt that you've heard a lot of discussion in the market about things related to security products, about security policies and things like that. But the last time I checked, those don't keep the lights on. That's the operations team. Those are the folks that are responding to the tickets, investigating the breaches, and figuring out what they need to prioritize. But the world of security operations is not boring. In fact, it's probably as exciting as it ever been in the history of security. So in this episode of Security Boulevard, we wanted to talk about some of the changes that we've seen in security operations recently and how they can impact teams, because Lord knows you guys are so busy keeping the lights on, you may not be able to keep up with it. So listen to us instead. So gents, what's exciting in the world of security operations that we should be focusing on?
Well, I think, you talked about the teams getting busy, and I think really that's the fundamental thing that we're going to see is we have an environment that's built upon, and everything's predicated upon humans working at a keyboard to manage quote-unquote alerts where they think a security event happens and they got to go investigate it and figure out whether it's real or not and then how to work around the problem and solve it. But we're now entering the AI age where things are moving at much greater speed and with much greater volume. And as we bring AI agents into the mix, we're going to have a lot more data coming into the Security Operations Center that is then going to generate a lot more alerts. Hopefully, they're not false positives, but if they are true positive alerts, then we have a problem because now we've got a whole lot more security incidents happening and we have to investigate them.
Well, hold on a minute, Jack. Wasn't AI supposed to keep me from getting all of these security alerts? Weren't they supposed to summarize things?
Well, that's the challenge, right?
Yeah, I like to start even before. Like, what's interesting in security operations is that security operations has become the focal point for a lot of security responses. Let's go back, like I've been doing this for a few years. Let's go back 3-4 years ago, kind of thing. Let's talk about cloud security, right? Mm-hmm. Or 5 or so. We had this thing about where should cloud security reside? Like, does it reside in a center of competence? Where does cloud security reside, right? And we saw we saw a shift, right? And I'd argue that I point to a couple of transactions that happened in January, February of 25, right? We saw a partnership announcements from Cisco and Checkpoint with Wiz, right? Hey, we're going to work with you guys, right? That was one thing. Then a few days later, we saw that Palo Alto Networks, they announced that they were moving Prisma, a lot of the security operations capability of Prisma Cloud into the Cortex Cloud product, right? That was one thing. And then the other thing was about a month later, I want to say March 18th, 2025, when Google/Alphabet announced largest acquisition in cyber, when they announced they were acquiring Wiz. And when that happened, right, we put out a research, and our contention was that between that transaction and the Palo Alto move, we had settled the question of where should cloud security operations reside. Cloud became one more piece into the SecOps puzzle, right? And so I think that, like, that's one of the shifts that we've seen, is that we've settled that question. And this is top of mind for me because as we are recording this, I was just at Google Cloud Next a few days ago, where now the Google Wiz transaction has closed, and now they are officially part of Google. So it was a big coming out party for Wiz as part of Google, right? So that would we kind of settled that question, right? Mm-hmm. Cloud incidents belong, at least their triage belongs in the SOC, right? This is interesting because the way that you address cloud incidents might be through code, right? Ideally through code, right? With infrastructure as code. Well, that means that the cloud security, the response to a cloud security incident may start with the SOC, but then it has to be quickly routed to your development pipeline. So how is that relationship going, right? I think that one of the changes, sorry, I know we're taking this in weird directions, but one of the changes in security operations that we're seeing is this need to be a lot closer to where the code is being written, developers are, for that better integration for cloud security instance.
I mean, I see the value in that. Also, I think it's hilarious that we solved the problem where cloud security should live just in time for cloud to become irrelevant because AI, everybody. but these things kind of are creating their own little cycles, if you will. You know, for your point, we've got to get closer to where the problems are to solve them.
Yep.
If you've heard the term shift left recently, you know exactly what that means. We're bringing security further into the development process so that we're not dealing with the results of bad decisions. We're dealing with the bad decisions at the time they get made. But I think that kind of comes back to the point you were making, Jack, about the fact that AI, especially if you consider what's been going on with Anthropic Mythos and other things related to that, where it's finding a ridiculous number of vulnerabilities and reporting on them. And now it really honestly feels like a lot of us are jumping in shadows because is this a thing that I should be worried about? Well, Mythos says that I've got 100 bugs that I need to close, but it turns out like 3 of them are really important and the other 97 are branches off of those 3 bugs. Like, how are these teams going to be able to keep their heads above water? Because now they have to worry about becoming developers and fortune tellers to get ahead of the AI.
Well, if you look at what Fernando is talking about, is we had a concept of a SOC a few years ago, right? That was dealing with it had sort of had a well-defined set of issues that it was a domain that it was working with. We now drop cloud in on top of their heads. Now they have to deal with that. We're now dropping AI in on top of their heads, and that's yet another burden that they have to deal with. And then we were talking about right beforehand, we were talking about yet another burden that they're going to have to deal with, which is the change in certificate lifetimes and certificate expirations.
We'll get to that.
We'll get to that. But the whole thing here is we're just dropping more and more on top of the heads of this team of people, and I'm concerned that we're trying to play catch up on the tools that we've given them to manage their workload and their activities, and I'm concerned that the tools we've given them are insufficient as the scale and the volume of the problem grows, and we need to possibly rethink the architecture of how we're dealing with the SOC and SOC tools and what their jobs really are. And can we build an organization? Does it still make sense to build an organization where somebody sits in front of a keyboard and an alert pops up and they say, okay, I need to investigate that alert. Let me go and start doing this investigation. Now we're applying AI to that investigation, which is great, and it's accelerating their workload. But at what point does the number of events coming in that have to be investigated exceeds the human capacity to deal with it? When we go from, a SOC analyst having a workload of 10 events that they have to deal with in a day to 100 to 1,000, right? At what point does the SOC analyst go, I'm out of here. It's impossible. I'm not on the stair stepper that I stay in place. I climb a step and it dropped 3 steps because I can never catch up.
So yeah, I want Fernando to weigh in on this because I actually have a perspective on this that I think might be interesting to listeners out there. But go ahead, Fernando.
I wanted to comment that I think that we are past that point, and if as you think about AI SOC, as a term.
Right.
There are, by my count, upwards of 50 vendors right now,
Mhm.
with some variation of, we have agentic AI and agentic capabilities to help you with that burden, right? That's a really interesting space right now. I think that we're seeing movement from the large incumbents, right? We're seeing movement from the large challengers, right? And we're seeing move from the startups, right? In terms of, yes, we are deploying more and more agentic capabilities into our workflows. That opens a whole can of worms in terms of how do you govern those agents? And this is not an agent identity conversation yet. Right, but I think that's I think that one of the things we're seeing is that there's this massive interest in AI SOC, right? Parallel to that, though, there's something to keep in mind as well, is that the technical architecture of the SOC is changing, right? We are now routing. I mean, we've been doing this for a while now, but like we are thinking what data lives hot on the SIM, what data goes on storage, what data should be routed here. We're starting to do more detection closer to the edge, so that the only thing that actually feeds into the SIM is the alert, and then the actual data goes again to storage, and then you can read off code if you need to. So there's a lot of really interesting things going on in terms of data engineering in the SOC, and how we are automating these with again agentic type of workflows. So hopefully we'll get to a point where the analyst, the human sitting there, is not a human in the loop. I don't like the term human in the loop because it doesn't scale.
Yes.
Right. I prefer like human over the loop or
Well, and that's where I'm driving at. But you were going to say some concepts there.
Well, here my take on it is kind of going back to what you said about security operations need to shift left, right? DevSecOps is a term that we use a lot. Why? So we think about this, and just for reference, my background in networking, one of my little hobby horses that I've been on for a while is, why am I solving for your stupid decisions as a developer? Anybody who's ever used vMotion thinks it's magical. I think you need to write better code so that your application can survive a gateway change. But that's just me, because I've spent an entire career before this podcast implementing first hop resolution protocols, when all you need to do is write better software. And now you're telling me that as a SOC analyst, well, if you would just learn how code works, you could solve these problems before they hit production. Really, Mr. Developer? If you learn how operations works, you'd write better code in the first place. We need to stop treating developers like prima donna ballerinas and start treating them like the stagehands that need to understand how everything works. Because if you're going to say that the operations team needs to understand a little bit of finance and a little bit of development and a little bit of operations and a little bit of design, I'm going to argue that that cross-functional team also needs to yank those developers out of their little cubicles behind their wall of Mountain Dew cans and get them out to fight a fire. I have always said in my entire career that you can solve most technical problems by putting everyone in the IT organization on the help desk for about a week. When they see what reality looks like because of the decisions that they have made from a cost perspective or a licensing perspective, or I'm never going to see how that plays out in reality, a lot of things get solved. So I want to push back on this idea that the solution to the problem is to put people in those, is to put more on the SOC team. Think about Office Space. Do you guys remember the infamous scene with the bills and the engineer who's like, well, I take the plans from the engineering, or plans from the customers, and I give them to the engineers because I have people skills, damn it. Today, that guy would get fired because the real solution is that the customers need to learn a little bit more about engineering so they write the plans better so that the engineers don't have to decode customer speak. Or that guy becomes an AI agent who can speak both worlds, which is what a lot of people want to do because that's scalable, right? If I can create a go-between that takes the inputs from the customer and transforms them into a function that engineers understand, then I solve that problem. But you're not reducing the data that you're dealing with. You're just translating it.
So I agree with you to some extent, but I think is sort of my version of that soapbox is that cybersecurity has been, and I used to say this about identity, but I think it's really about cybersecurity in general, is 10 or 15 years behind the rest of enterprise IT. You think about the way we've built systems in enterprise IT, we came up with this sort of parable years ago of pets versus cattle.
Yep.
And we used to manage our IT environment by treating every system as a pet, and we would name it, and we would feed it, and we would individually take care of it, and when it got sick, we would be upset, and we would go talk to it and make it happy in some form or another. And we've now gotten to the point where we say that's a really bad way to do things as we scaled from tens of machines to hundreds of machines to thousands to hundreds of thousands of systems. We can't possibly name and feed every single one of these pets. So now we treat them as cattle. It's just a field of cattle. We have this concept called intent-based configuration, intent-based management, where we say we've built a system such that I say I want it to behave this way, and it automatically configures it. And when something goes wrong, it says the behavior isn't the way we said it was. Fix it, make it work the way we said it was. In cybersecurity, we're still at the pets phase of really managing, and that's what I was talking about at the level of the SOC. We're still dealing and triaging every single problem as a named pet problem and not saying, how do we automate everything to the point where you get a report that says, you were attacked and we automatically breached this, fixed this attack attempt, right? Or we prevented that. Or this guy showed up with a laptop, right? He went to Starbucks and his laptop was contaminated at Starbucks. So we've partitioned out and we've sent him all the stuff and we've updated the laptop and now he's good to go. And he never knew it happened, right? And we never had to sit there at a keyboard and deal with this.
Fernando, thoughts?
I think we've been doing some of that, right? And again, that AI SOC space is moving towards that. We have the playbooks, we understand what the domain looks like, we know what kind of problems exist, and either for a large organization, they have usually the internal teams to do this. For smaller organizations, you kind of rely on your vendor a little bit. I'm not going to go into a SIM versus XDR rant right now.
But we
want to.
We want to.
No, the only joke I'll make is that it's a missed opportunity that we never had an XDR conference in the DR, the Dominican Republic. We should have an excursion to the Dominican Republic.
You know, we could make that happen.
Let's do that. Let's do that.
That would be fine. But we have been adding those capabilities. What I meant in the context of getting the SOC closer to developers, is not so much to have SOC teams write code themselves, though from a level of engineering your responses, that's an extremely helpful thing to do. But it's more about, okay, how are you aligned with, okay, are you giving those developers the right information they need to do something? It's kind of a dated example now, but you no longer ship them an email or a PDF with, here are the issues in your environment. You file tickets with their code, right? And increasingly, AI, you now have, on the development side, you have a very interesting proposition of, can we have AI agents fix that code? And that brings the whole, it's too bad that like Mitch is not here. Mitch Ashley from Futurum, he's the expert at this, right? But are we deploying AI capabilities, just like we're deploying them in the SOC? Are we deploying them in the SDLC in a way that helps with that? So we are. I'm optimistic. I understand the frustration, but I'm a little more on the optimistic side.
So I love that you brought up the pets versus cattle argument, Jack, because I've actually hated that argument for a very long time, and I'll tell you why. Because people who use that as the argument have never actually raised cattle. I have. I am the only CCIE that I know that knows how to milk a cow the old-fashioned way, because there is a different class of cows, dairy cows. Dairy cows exist to serve a very specific function and have a lifetime that cannot be easily replicated. You think you can get milk out of a bull, I've got a bridge to sell you cheap. But more importantly, in security, we need that concept of dairy cattle. I don't necessarily need to name them all, but they're all valuable to me for the function that they serve. So a firewall has a specific function that cannot be easily replicated. A SIM, a SOAR, XDR, IDS, IPS, the list goes on and on and on because security is very tool focused. But we cannot lose sight of the fact that we do need all of those things and we can't just wholesale replace them. Think about something as innocuous as DLP, right? Like, man, if we wrote better access lists, we wouldn't need DLP. Said anybody who's probably about to get an email from Brian Krebs asking for a comment about why their entire database of social security numbers was just leaked online, because who needs DLP, right? Because these are the kinds of solutions that we put in place to catch the exceptions when they fall through the cracks. You know, as our friend Karen Lopez said at Security Field Day this week, a lot of these problems are not the results of a bad decision. They are the results of a lot of bad decisions that compound on top of each other until they become a problem. And that's, I think, one of the reasons why we kind of end up where we do a lot of times is it's not bad to think about replacing your pets with cattle. It's bad when somebody at the board level says, well, why don't we replace all of our pets with cattle?
Right, and I think you're, purposefully or not, maybe misinterpreting my argument, which is that we need to rethink the mechanisms by which we do things in cybersecurity.
That's fair.
Okay. Look, my history is I was an engineer. I was a software developer and a hardware developer for many, many years, right? We stopped writing in assembly a long time ago. I actually had an experience where I helped people understand the value of moving from assembly to a higher level language, C in this case. And after discussing all of this, the chief architects of the product basically said, that's great, but a compiler will never generate code that runs faster than our handwritten assembly code can run. And I was like, this is absolutely nuts. But
it's a pedantic argument. You're saving like 10 milliseconds.
Back then, to some people, it made sense. It was important. But we've long passed that point where nobody does it anymore because the compilers are so much better than humans are at this job. And we now no longer write in C. I mean, most people don't develop in a very high level language.
Linus Torvalds would like to have a word with you.
Most people, in most application development these days, containerized applications in the cloud, all of the applications the security teams are running today are containerized JavaScript-based stuff, and it's not assembly, it's not x86 or MIPS assembly like I did, right? Nobody writes in binary code anymore for a reason, and that is because there is a better way to do these things. Now, that doesn't mean there are exceptions to the rules, but if we continue to say, let's take AI and use it to make incremental gains in efficiency on the way the SOC is, and still have a SOC that is predicated on a human sitting at a keyboard responding to events, we are going to have problems because we will never solve all of the problems we have. We need to build an architecture where we trust the responses, just like we do in intent-based configuration, and then we have overseers. Now, you talked about humans in the loop versus humans over the loop. What I'm talking about is changing the loop completely so that the whole point of intent-based configuration is you don't come in under the hood and tweak things, because then the intent-based configuration system is going to say that was a change that wasn't in my system. I'm going to go overwrite it again, right? Reverse it, and that's what I'm talking about here is rethinking the way we do SOC systems, so that it is 100% predicated on an automated system with humans going afterwards and saying, is it working the way I believe I intend to? And we need to change the intent based of the system so that it fixes something.
I understand the principle. I would push back a little bit, because intent-based networking, or intent-based computing, like Kubernetes environments, right? They work on a set of primitives, or they work at a level of abstraction where things are relatively constrained, right? You worry about, okay, does the container does the pod have the right number of containers? Yes, it does. Great, we're going. Does the pod have access? Is the volume access for the containers work? Okay, great, we're good. We're not going to change anything, right? Security operations is wildly more chaotic than that, right? In the sense that you're trying to, first of all, you're trying to account for signals in behavior from an adversary that is chaotic by nature, right? You are trying to figure out where does the broader context for the organization fit in. So, for example, if you see some weird website pop up with your brand, right? Do you know if that is brand abuse or is that just the marketing team firing up a new website for a new campaign that's going on? You need that context, right? That level of connection between security operations and the rest of the organization, that level of abstraction, that I don't think we can intent away.
Well, and please don't get me wrong. I'm not saying that intent-based security is the right thing. What I'm talking about is I'm using that as an example of automation and trusting the automation, and that
100%.
we need to change the fundamental predicates of SOC today is a human is doing the work. And now what we're doing is applying AI to saying, let's make the human do the work a little bit faster and just a little bit more better, and give him him or her, give the SOC analyst instantaneous access to information rather than making them search for that information, which is great. But I don't think that will scale, and I think we need to rethink that predicate of the human doing it and saying, how do we build a system that is 100% predicated on automation, like a compiler? Nobody questions a compiler. Nobody questions Kubernetes that it's going to work. Nobody questions any of these things. It's a hard problem to solve, but that doesn't mean we shouldn't try to solve it.
You know, Jack, I love the fact that you are so hopeful about this future where automation will rule everything. And I'll tell you why we won't get there anytime soon. CEOs can't yell at an AI agent.
IPv6.
No, the problem is that people want a human in the loop as an oversight tool. Not because we want to make sure that a human understands what's going on. It's because the key stakeholders in the organization want somebody to yell at when something goes wrong.
Rightfully so, right? I mean, here we are diverting into an AI ethics type of conversation, but I worry that we are moving towards this world where we are treating AI as quote unquote teammates. There still needs to be a human responsible for something at some point.
And the reason why we want a human responsible is because only a human can feel the kind of emotion that would make them question a decision
100%.
Or double check something. I mean, the last time I checked, ChatGPT and Grok have no shame and cannot be programmed to feel said shame, which means they will do dumb things like delete the entire email inbox of your CEO and go, well, I didn't know I was supposed to do that. You're absolutely right. That was wrong.
Oh, I'm so sorry. Yeah,
and they won't know why that response feels so hollow. Versus an intern, I promise you, they won't make that mistake the same way again. And that's one of those problems, is that the scaling is not the technology concern to me. The scaling is that we cannot make these machines understand the ramifications of their decisions fast enough to heap this onto them. Because it's still going to have to come back to, think about the when the U.S. Decided to change all their Minutemen stuff over. Like there was massive resistance in the United States military to changing the chain of command for a nuclear launch to being something that was not approved by two people in a silo with keys. And it was because they did not trust the fact that somebody along the way wouldn't just blindly launch a nuclear weapon.
Such cheery thoughts.
I know, right?
Come on. How do I respond to that, Tom?
You don't have to.
You can quote war games.
Do
you want to play a game? Right?
Yes, do I want to play a game? I'm playing a game right now.
I can't do the Joshua voice. No.
Yeah. Well, I think we'll probably go ahead and wrap it there. We had another topic we wanted to bring up, but guess what? That just means we get another episode of Security Boulevard out of it. But as you can see, that a lot of the things that are going on in security operations space are changing, and even the definition of what a SOC team is supposed to be doing and what their responsibilities are has massively shifted in the last 18 months. And I think the next 18 months are going to be rather entertaining as we deal with the fallout from cloud security acquisitions and AI agent takeovers and things like that. But you know what? You can probably find the answers to all of those things right here on our podcast. Before we go, though, I'd like our esteemed guests to let everybody know where they can find, at home can find some of the stuff they're working on.
Jack Poller here. You can find me on my corporate website, paradigmtechnica.com, and I also have a column called Secure by Design on Security Boulevard.
So Fernando, most of our stuff is on Futurum, the futurumgroup.com, and then you can find the articles we publish there. I'm also relatively active on LinkedIn. I'm picking up a little bit more on Blue Sky again, which is nice. But yeah, and out and about, right?
Yes.
Spring and fall are really busy for analysts for conference season. So if you see me around at an event, by all means, stop by and say hi.
And by the time you're listening to this episode of the podcast, we should have all the videos from Security Field Day published on the Tech Field Day website. So we'd love it if you would go over and have a listen to those. There's some great conversations from companies like Fortinet and Dell, and also a great delegate roundtable about quantum security that you're not going to want to miss. But we want to thank you very much for listening to this episode of Security Boulevard. If you enjoyed this conversation, you know what to do. Head over to YouTube or your favorite podcast app so you don't miss any of our episodes. We also would appreciate it if you'd leave us a rating and a review and possibly a comment. Although if your comment is Tom needs to shut up, maybe wait on that one. The podcast is brought to you by SecurityBoulevard.com and the Futurum Group. If you want to check out the show notes as well as check out all of our other episodes, make sure you head over to SecurityBoulevard.com, the TechStrong TV website, or our TechStrong TV over-the-top app. It's available on Apple TV, Roku, and one of these days I'm going to figure out, get it running on one of those old Zenith picture tube TVs, but that might be a bigger undertaking. Make sure you're following Security Boulevard on all of the social media, X, Twitter, LinkedIn, Blue Sky, Mastodon, Orkut, AIM, Friendster, whatever it is, just look for Security BLVD. Thank you very much for tuning in, and we'll see you all next week.